Welcome back to Historical Context. Today we continue our series on the colonies during the English Commonwealth. Today we continue in Virginia, where we last left off in May of 1652, when the colonial government was under the leadership of Sir William Berkeley, who was loyal to the late King of England, King Charles I. And Sir William Berkeley handed over power to the Commonwealth of England and to one of their commissioners, a man by the name of Richard Bennett, who became governor. In July 1652, a major world event occurred as England declared war on the Netherlands. The war would be known as the First Anglo-Dutch War. In Virginia, goods leaving the colony on a Dutch ship were seized by forces loyal to the Commonwealth. So that war extended to the colonies as well. A group of men, one of them being William Claiborne, no stranger to the podcast, petitioned England for the return of the goods to them personally, claiming they were illegally sold from land they had since acquired. The Council of State reviewed the matter, and in December, they ruled that the men could have the goods back. So these commissioners are beginning to have some self-interest in the economic goings-on of the colony, and they're beginning to be rewarded essentially for their efforts. They also ruled, that's the Council of State, that a Parliament law of October 1650 was no longer valid because the colony had been brought under control. If you recall from previous episodes, Parliament passed a law forbidding trade with colonies loyal to King Charles, including Virginia, in October of 1650. So now the Council of State is saying that law is void because Virginia is now under our control. But everything was not harmonious in Virginia. In November, the Grand Assembly met and a resolution exposed the problem. Let's have a look at the writing. We conceive it fit that James Pyland, returned Burgess for the upper parish of the Isle of Wight, be removed out of this house, and that he stand committed to answer such things as shall be objected against him, as an abettor of Thomas Woodward in his mutinous and rebellious declaration, and concerning his, the said Pyland, blasphemy. So essentially what's going on is that there's certain areas of the colony that are heavily royalist, and the Burgesses that they're sending, the representatives to the House of Burgesses, are highly supportive of the royalist cause. And so this gentleman, Mr. Pyland, was ejected from the House of Burgesses and accused of blasphemy. But at the same time, same session, certain individuals were being granted special privileges. Let's have a look. Whereas an act was made in the Assembly, 1642, for encouragement of discoveries to the westward and southward of this country, granting them all profits arising thereby for 14 years, which act is since discontinued and made void, it is by this assembly ordered that Colonel William Claiborne and Captain Henry Fleet, they and their associates with them, either jointly or severally, may discover and shall enjoy such benefits, profits, and trades for 14 years as they shall find out in places where no English ever have been and discovered, nor have had any particular trade, and to take up such lands by patents, proving their rights as they shall think good. Nevertheless, not excluding others after their choice from taking up lands and planting in these new discovered places. Claiborne and Fleet are basically awarded a monopoly on westward expansion, both the lands and the trade that would come out of there. And again, another example of some self-serving, if you will, onto the commissioners. In January of 1653, it is revealed in the minutes of the Committee for Foreign Affairs in England that a ship called John was dispatched with instructions for the Virginia colony, and the ship known as John went down at sea. Interestingly, in reading the notes, it seems nobody had made a copy of these instructions or knew what they were. So a delay is essentially created between England and Virginia because Virginia is supposed to receive these instructions. They don't show up. England finds out that the ship went down, but for some reason, this is actually in the notes, England can't figure out what they had asked them to do. So interim governor Richard Bennett is going to stay on as colonial governor for an extended period of time. It is also important to note that tremendous political whirlwinds were occurring in England at the same time, leading up to Oliver Cromwell's dismissal of Parliament. In April of 1653, Sir John Clotworthy was given license to transport 500 Irish men to the Virginia colony. In July, the General Assembly does something rather surprising. They offer the Powhatan chief one of two lands. So he has a choice between one of two areas of land based on a petition he presented to the Assembly. It was a stark difference to the war that was fought by the two less than a decade earlier. William Berkeley, who was scheduled to leave on a ship for England or Holland, it was his choice, was also granted an 8-month extension to procure a ship, as the Anglo-Dutch War was affecting his ability to leave. Also during this time, various petitions were coming into England from merchants regarding trade and their desire to control some of these trade routes. Parliament responded by forbidding any growth of tobacco in England. So now if you live in England, you cannot grow tobacco anymore, and that is to give Virginia a larger share of the market. Finally, the Assembly granted Roger Greene 1,000 acres of land south of the colony on the Roanoke River. Greene would found what would become known today as the town of Albemarle, North Carolina. In January 1654, notice comes to Virginia of a change. Let's have a look at the writing. It having pleased God to alter the government of this Commonwealth by entrusting the same to a Lord Protector and successive triennial parliaments, as they may perceive by the platform of government herewith sent. So Oliver Cromwell is now Lord Protector of England, along with a Council of State, which serves in an executive function as well, and a parliament that must meet at least once every 3 years. The letter goes on to refer to Cromwell as His Highness, and this is language I'd never seen before in his writings. So I think the idea of His Highness is something that people associate with a monarch in today's world, but in fact it appears to be language that was invented for the Republic of England. Also, Richard Bennett is retained as the colony's governor for the time being, or, quote, until the next set of ships are sent. The letter acknowledges interference by people in Virginia over the affairs of Maryland, and the English government pledges to remedy those boundaries, and those boundaries being political boundaries. England is reinventing its government again and fighting a war with the Dutch, so it makes sense that it would not press these issues at this time. In 1654, the English Council of State continues to get bombarded with petitions from Virginia merchants asking them to crack down on the planting of tobacco in England. It's already been banned, but it appears to be becoming a black market. And it appears as if English planters are just flat out defying this parliamentary law, and maybe Parliament isn't enforcing it. Could very well be. The Council of State appears to authorize the Virginia merchants to, quote, remedy the problem. And I guess that would mean opening the door up to litigation, if I had to guess. I can't imagine a Virginia merchant going over to England and burning an illegal field and saying, I'm enforcing the law. I think it's more of a litigation issue. The General Assembly in Virginia in 1654 selected Colonel Edward Hill to serve as its speaker. Hill was previously involved in putting down Ingle's Rebellion in Maryland, if you remember that on the podcast. We discussed it several weeks ago. But there was a complication here. Let's have a look at the writing. Colonel Edward Hill, unanimously chosen Speaker of this House, was afterwards maliciously reported by William Hatcher to be an atheist and blasphemer, according to an information exhibited against him in the last quarter court, from which the Honorable Governor and Council then cleared the said Colonel Edward Hill and now certified the same unto the House. So Colonel Hill survives this charge of blasphemy and atheism, if you will, but he would face more controversy later on. In March of 1655, Richard Bennett would resign as governor and go to England to visit Oliver Cromwell. The colony named Edward Digges as the colonial governor to replace him. Historian Wilcom Washburn noted that the Virginia House of Burgesses began governing the colony more and more as the Commonwealth government seemed less interested in dealing with their business. And that would make sense. England's got its own issues going on. They don't seem too interested in colonial America. They've already made the comments that we talked about previously on the podcast about Massachusetts. And it wouldn't be surprising with Virginia now under their control and under the control of their allies that they would feel the same. Digges would be compensated by the Assembly with 25,000 pounds of tobacco. Moving on to 1655, the biggest story of that year, of all things, would involve a plate. Colonel Richard Lee was returning from England in a ship named the Anthony of London when searchers at a place known as Gravesend, this isn't in Virginia, it's somewhere else, searchers reportedly stole a plate with the Lee family coat of arms on it. Colonel Lee appealed, now in Virginia, for the return of the plate. The Order of His Highness and Council, which I believe now is a new name for the Council of State, referred the matter to the Commissioners of the Customs, which determined in November that the plate be returned. Governor Digges, interestingly enough, was highly invested in the silkworm industry. He believed it was going places and even had production set up on his tobacco farm with 3 Armenians as employees. Digges used mulberry trees to cultivate the silkworm. To this day, mulberry trees exist on the site of his former plantation. So Edward Digges had his own operation going on. In late 1656, the Assembly receives a request. Let's have a look at the writing. We could not find a fitter means to represent the condition of this country to your Highness than this worthy person, Mr. Digges, our late governor, whose occasions calling him into England, we have entrusted him with the state of this place as he left it. We shall beseech your highness to give credit to his relations, which we assure ourselves will be faithful. So Digges is summoned to England to serve as a liaison to the merchants there. Colonel Samuel Matthews, who was Digges' second in command, becomes the colony's governor. Little is known about the first year of Colonel Samuel Mather's tenure, but by December of 1657, complaints about him are coming into England. Merchants were complaining that they were receiving no advance or encouragement, and they requested that Edward Digges be sent back as governor. They asked if that was not possible for Oliver Cromwell to nominate somebody else to replace Colonel Matthews. So he is not very popular. It appears as if the complaints went unanswered. The notes of the General Assembly are rather sparse until March of 1658, when the Assembly ejected lawyers, asked them to leave, set a date of July 10th as the latest date for planting tobacco. So now you have to plant it by this date. Set a height of 4.5 feet as sufficient for a fence, and banned the export of hides and iron. The Assembly also raised taxes on tobacco exports. Why not? They have a monopoly. And earmarked 500 pounds of the tariff to be paid directly to Governor Matthews. On April 1st, 1658, Governor Matthews and William Claiborne send notice to the Assembly on behalf of the governor and council. Let's have a look. The governor and council, for many important causes, do think fit hereby to declare that they do now dissolve this present assembly, and that the speaker accordingly do dismiss the Burgesses. The House of Burgesses responds. Let's take a look. The said dissolution, as the case now standeth, is not presidential, neither legal, according to the laws now in force. Therefore we humbly desire a revocation of the said declaration, especially seeing we doubt not, but speedily to finish the present affairs to the satisfaction of your honor and the whole country. So we have a disagreement between Colonel Matthews and the House of Burgesses. And remember, his popularity is declining, so this is not going to help things. The governor responds that the dispute over the power to dissolve will be brought before Lord Protector Oliver Cromwell. The Burgesses respond back unanimously that the governor's response is unsatisfactory and request again that the dissolution be revoked. The governor responds by revoking the dissolution, but still formally referring the matter back to England. So the House of Burgesses wins the battle, but the debate rages on, and the House of Burgesses decides to draw up a committee to make their case. The committee not only concludes that they have the power, but they also propose that the House of Burgesses replace the governor's council, but state that Governor Matthews' powers will actually remain intact. They then pass a resolution that, quote, the supreme power of this country lie in the Burgesses, end quote. So interestingly there, the legislative and executive branches in Virginia fighting with one another over power. The Burgesses then proceed with business as usual. In the Virginia Historical Society's notes, there is no actual appeal from Matthews to England. So it makes me wonder whether he just took the loss and moved on, if he never sent the appeal, or if he did and it didn't get recorded. Former Governor Digges has more success, as he writes back in the summer of 1658 that he has successfully convinced the English government to order the destruction of any illegal tobacco growing in England. So the new assignment, I think, paid off for Edward Digges. In August, a protest occurred in England related to the enforcement of the tobacco laws. So now the complaining comes from the other side. The Highness and Council agree to review the matter further. It's the first time I could see that the English are protesting a policy derived from the colonies. An interesting situation. Not a lot of primary information exists of Virginia in 1659, but there is some significance to this year. Prior to the end of 1658, Oliver Cromwell dies, and his son Richard is named Lord Protector. The March Assembly was instructed to acknowledge Richard as Lord Protector, and it did so. But historian Wilcom Washburn makes a significant observation. Let's have a look at his writing. The Assembly of 1659 marks the high-water point of local government in Virginia. Not only were the Burgesses supreme in matters of general legislation, compelling the governor and secretary to bow to their sovereign power, but in their home counties affairs were conducted much as the local justices saw fit. He continues, the Assembly of 1659 even authorized free trade with the Indians by anyone in any goods, even guns and ammunition. Never before had regulation on a point of such vital interest to the security of the colony been so utterly abandoned. So free trade really reigning in full force in Virginia. The Burgesses, the legislative authority, really going strong, but the harmony would not last. In December 1659, a letter arrived to Virginia from London. Richard Cromwell had resigned as Lord Protector, and the country was in upheaval. The author of the letter said that London, quote, might be burned to ashes and the streets running with blood, end quote. The letter indicates soldiers are fighting each other and turning on their commanders. London is once again in need of leadership, and its course would directly impact Virginia and the colonies. Next week, we move to Maryland, where events there take a tumultuous turn under the leadership of the Commonwealth of England. Next time on Historical Context.